Well, if my music, the way I sing it and play the piano and do it, if it's a part of a communist plot.
Jerry Lee Lewis spent his entire life surrounded by chaos. The fame, the money, and the screaming crowds could not drown out the darkness that seemed to follow him from one marriage to the next. By the time his fifth wife, Shawn Stevens, was found dead inside their home, after just 77 days of marriage, people began whispering that this was no ordinary tragedy. But what made the story truly disturbing was not just how she died. It was the strange details investigators uncovered inside the house. And when Jerry Lee was asked about what had happened to his wife, the explanation he gave sent chills through everyone who heard it. Jerry Lee's tumultuous love life. Jerry Lee Lewis was one of the biggest stars rock and roll had ever seen. His records sold by the millions, his concerts became legendary, and his wild energy at the piano earned him the nickname The Killer. But the chaos that surrounded his music was nothing compared to that of his personal life. 4 wives came and went before the fifth. And when his fifth wife tragically died, the story that Jerry Lee told about her death was so strange that even his most loyal fans did not know what to believe. Jerry Lee Lewis's first was Dorothy Barton, the daughter of a local preacher. They met as teenagers in Louisiana, moving through the same church and community networks that defined social life in the rural South. Dorothy was the kind of girl that parents approved of. She was steady, grounded, and raised right. Jerry Lee was something else entirely. When they married on February 21, 1952, he was just 16 years old. The whispers started almost immediately. Some people believed there was a baby on the way or a scandal to cover up. Whatever the truth, the marriage officially lasted only 20 months. They separated due to incompatibility, which was a polite way of saying that Jerry Lee's erratic lifestyle had already begun to consume him. The divorce was finalized on October 8, 1953, when Jerry was barely 18 years old. But he did not stay single for long. He soon found Sally Jane Mitchum, a local young woman from Louisiana, who moved in the same tight-knit Faraday circles as the Lewis family. They met through mutual acquaintances, right as Jerry Lee's first marriage was failing. The timing was messy, and the courtship was rushed. In September of 1953, they tied the knot. But there was one problem. Jerry Lee had married Sally Jane several days before his divorce from Dorothy Barton was legally finalized. The bigamy was not discovered immediately, but the fact of it would follow him. The marriage later fractured under the pressure of his exploding music career and his unpredictable temper. By 1957, they were divorced. They had 2 children together, but the children did not keep them together. The third marriage became one of the most controversial chapters of Jerry Lee Lewis's life. Her name was Myra Gail Brown, and she was very young when they married. She was also Jerry Lee's first cousin and the daughter of his bass player, J.W. Brown. At the time, Jerry Lee had been staying with their family in Memphis while building his career at Sun Records. The wedding took place in secret on December 12, 1957. Jerry Lee was 22 years old, 9 years older than Myra. To make the situation even more complicated, Jerry Lee was still technically married to Sally Jane Mitchum when he married Myra. The divorce had not been finalized, and a second wedding ceremony had to be repeated in 1958 after the paperwork cleared. The public found out the disturbing truth during his May 1958 tour of England. British reporters, who were not as easily charmed by rock and roll as American audiences, discovered Myra's true age. Jerry Lee tried to lie his way out of it, claiming she was older. But the reporters did not believe him. The story shocked everyone, and his tour had to be canceled. radio stations in the United States pulled his music from their playlists, and his booking fees dropped instantly from $10,000 per night to $250. The man who had been one of the most exciting performers in the world became radioactive overnight. The marriage lasted 13 years, but it was not a happy 13 years. When Myra finally filed for divorce in 1970, her court filings painted a picture of horror. She cited extreme physical and mental maltreatment. She testified that Jerry Lee had subjected her to every type of maltreatment imaginable. The woman who had married him at a young age had survived to tell the story, and the story was devastating. The fourth wife was Jaron Elizabeth Gunn Pate, a woman from Memphis. They met through the Southern music and social scene after Jerry Lee had transitioned from rock and roll to country music, a move that had resurrected a career that most people had written off. They married in 1971, and for a while, the marriage seemed more stable than the ones that had come before. But the stability was an illusion. Jaron filed for divorce in 1979, citing extreme cruelty, violent behavior, and Jerry Lee's deep, ongoing addiction to illicit substances. The legal proceedings continued for several years, and on June 8, 1982, shortly before the couple's final divorce and a contested financial settlement hearing, Jaron accidentally drowned in a friend's swimming pool. The Shelby County Medical Examiner officially ruled the death an accidental drowning, but there were endless questions and rumors surrounding her tragic death. Throughout these 4 marriages, Jerry Lee had earned an extremely controversial reputation. By the time he met his 5th wife, the world thought they had seen everything. But the story of this marriage would prove to be the darkest chapter in a life already filled with darkness. The ill-fated 5th marriage. To Shawn Stevens. Shawn Michelle Stevens was 25 years old when she entered Jerry Lee's orbit. She was a former waitress with honey blonde hair who had grown up in Michigan and still carried herself with the straightforward manner of the Midwest. She was younger than him and pretty enough to turn heads wherever she went. But what drew her to Jerry Lee was not his money or his fame. According to friends who knew her at the time, she genuinely loved his music and believed that she could be the one to calm the storms that had wrecked his previous marriages. They met at a music party through mutual friends, the kind of gathering where musicians and hangers-on mixed freely and boundaries were often crossed. Shawn's co-worker was dating Jerry Lee's road manager, a man named J.W. W. Witten. That connection brought Shawn directly into the inner circle of a man who had been famous for 30 years. The chemistry between them was immediate, or at least it seemed that way to outsiders who watched them together. Within weeks, the relationship had accelerated from casual dating to serious commitment. On June 7, 1983, Jerry Lee and Shawn married in a ceremony that was small by his standards, but significant in what it represented. He was trying again, and she was willing to take the risk. The marriage would go on to last exactly 77, a number that seems almost impossibly small when measured against the weight of what followed. 2.5 months was all the time they had together as husband and wife, and according to the accounts that emerged after her death, much of that time was marked by conflict rather than joy. According to insider reports and witness statements that were later obtained by investigative journalists who dug into the case, trouble began almost immediately after the wedding. Jerry Lee, who had spent decades getting his way in every aspect of his life, reportedly demanded complete compliance from his new wife. And when she resisted or questioned his authority, his temper flared in ways that frightened everyone who witnessed it. The situation reportedly escalated during an incident in which Jerry Lee allegedly became angry after Shawn and her visiting sister, Shelley, declined an intimate request involving all parties. Shawn was uncomfortable with the suggestion, and her sister was reportedly shocked by it. Their refusal was said to have triggered an outburst that neither woman had anticipated. According to claims that later surfaced, during the dispute, Jerry Lee allegedly picked up a heavy ring of keys and threw them toward Shawn, striking her in the forehead and leaving an injury. The mark was reportedly visible enough that Shelley later described it to authorities as evidence that a physical altercation had taken place. Shawn, however, tried to downplay the incident, possibly in hopes of preserving the marriage, or out of concern about the consequences of speaking about it more openly. Insider accounts painted an even darker picture of the final days of the marriage. According to the claims, when Shawn wept and told Jerry Lee that she was leaving and that she could not stay with a man who treated her this way, he allegedly grabbed her by her robe and dragged her around the house. He told her that she could not leave him and that if she tried to go, he would hurt her in ways she could not imagine. It is important to note, however, that the courts did not completely accept these accounts as the full truth. While the allegations were detailed and specific, the legal system stopped short of declaring that every claim had been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Jerry Lee Lewis was never charged with a crime related to the allegations, and his defenders have always maintained that the stories were exaggerated by people who wanted to profit from his fame or settle old scores. What is not in dispute is that Shawn died less than 3 months after the wedding, and the circumstances of her death have never been fully resolved to everyone's satisfaction. The tragedy that followed would leave Jerry Lee Lewis a widower for the first time in his life, and the way he processed that loss would raise more questions than it answered. The tragic death of Shawn Stevens. On the afternoon of August 24, 1983, emergency services in DeSoto County, Mississippi, received a call that would launch one of the most controversial death investigations in rock and roll history. The caller reported an unresponsive female at the Lewis residence in Nesbitt, a small community located just south of the Tennessee border where Jerry Lee had made his home. The dispatcher noted the address and the name, and within minutes, first responders were on their way to the property of one of the most famous musicians in America. What they found inside the house did not fit the pattern of a natural or accidental death. First responder Sonny Daniels arrived at the scene alongside the Lewis housekeeper, a woman named Lottie Jackson, and together they made their way through the house to a guest bedroom where Shawn had been staying. When they entered the room, they discovered Shawn's body lying on the bed in a position that struck both of them as unusual. She was lying perfectly straight, as if someone had arranged her with care. The blankets on the bed had also been pulled neatly all the way up to her chin. The scene did not look like the aftermath of a sudden medical emergency or a fall. It looked staged. The physical condition of Shawn's body only deepened the mystery surrounding her death. According to reports filed by those who were present, she had clearly been gone for some time before the emergency call was ever placed. First responders also observed that her condition was inconsistent with what you would typically expect from an accidental drowning or natural causes. There were also visible signs of physical trauma on her face, details disturbing enough that both Daniels and Jackson would go on to describe what they witnessed during official proceedings. DeSoto County Sheriff Bill Davis stepped before reporters shortly after the discovery to address the growing public interest in the case. He issued a statement that was carefully worded, designed to calm speculation without committing to any particular theory of what had happened. Davis declared that there was no immediate or obvious evidence of foul play at the scene, meaning that the initial investigation had not uncovered anything that pointed directly to murder. He did not rule out the possibility that further investigation might reveal something different. But on that first day, standing in front of the cameras, he wanted to reassure the public that there was no active threat to the community. The public was not reassured. Within hours of the news breaking, skepticism spread like wildfire through the media, and the fan communities that had followed Jerry Lee's career for decades. People pointed out that Jerry Lee's fourth wife, Jaren Pate, had died tragically just 14 months earlier, under circumstances that many had found suspicious. The timing of her death, just weeks before the final divorce settlement, and the lack of witnesses who could explain what had happened had left a bad taste in the mouths of those who followed the story. Now, barely a year later, another wife was dead, and the questions multiplied. The media openly questioned how 2 consecutive wives could die under mysterious circumstances while married to the same man. Tabloids ran headlines that suggested everything from negligence to outright foul play, and talk radio shows invited callers to share their theories about what had really happened in the Nesbitt house. Community members who had known Jerry Lee for years began pointing fingers at him openly, referencing his reputation and accusing him of something far darker. The nickname that had once been a marketing tool now felt like a confession. Jerry Lee himself remained largely silent during those first days, a decision that his lawyers almost certainly advised. However, his silence did nothing to calm the growing storm of suspicion. He was a widower now, and he told anyone who asked that he was grieving. But the timing of Shawn's death, the condition of her body, and the disturbing pattern of his marital history made it difficult for many people to accept his grief at face value. The questions were not going away, and the investigation was only beginning to uncover details that would make the story even stranger. The investigation and crime scene discrepancies. The official autopsy was conducted by Dr. Jerry Francisco, the Shelby County medical examiner, a man whose name had already become controversial in forensic circles due to his handling of other high-profile death investigations in the Memphis area. Dr. Francisco ruled that Shawn Stevens had died of pulmonary edema, which is a buildup of fluid in the lungs. He attributed that condition to an overdose of a medication typically used to treat addiction. According to his report, Shawn had taken enough of this substance to stop her breathing, and the fluid in her lungs was the natural consequence of that overdose. The case, in his professional opinion, was a tragic accident. But outside forensic specialists who reviewed the file later came to a very different conclusion. Greg Kaufman, a medical examiner from Detroit with decades of experience in death investigations, examined the same documents and found them severely incomplete. Dr. Francisco's report, Kaufman noted, failed to explain why there were signs of physical trauma on Shawn's face, a detail that had been observed by the first responders and documented in their statements. The report also did not include any analysis of the blood evidence found under Shawn's fingernails, a glaring omission given that such evidence could have indicated whether she had fought back against an attacker. Most troubling of all, the autopsy completely omitted any mention of the major bruises that had been observed on Shawn's arm and hip, injuries that could not be explained by a simple overdose. The report, Kaufman concluded, was not a thorough medical examination. It was a document designed to close a case quickly. The problems with the investigation did not stop at the autopsy. A bombshell investigative report published by legendary journalist Richard Ben Kramer in Rolling Stone magazine in 1984 exposed that the crime scene itself had been profoundly compromised before police ever took control of the property. According to Kramer's reporting, which drew on interviews with first responders, housekeepers, and law enforcement personnel, the scene inside the Lewis home had been altered in ways that made it impossible to determine what had truly happened. According to the report, broken glass littered the bedroom floor where Shawn was found, but someone had deliberately gathered the largest and most dangerous shards and removed them from the room before investigators arrived. The removal of those shards was not an accident or an oversight. It was an active decision to hide evidence from the people who were supposed to examine it. Similarly, Shawn's heavily blood-stained clothes were discovered crammed inside a brown paper sack, hidden away in the master bathroom, as if someone had tried to conceal them from view. The clothes should have been left in place for the police to document and collect, but instead, they were stuffed into a bag and stashed where no one would think to look. Most disturbing of all, the housekeeper, Lottie Jackson, admitted to investigators that she had stripped the sheets, pillowcases, and bedding off the bed in the master bedroom before the police had finished processing the home. She claimed that she was simply trying to be helpful and that she wanted to clean up the mess before the officers arrived. But her actions had the effect of destroying whatever evidence might have been present on those linens. By the time the police conducted a proper search of the property, the bed had been stripped, the broken glass had been gathered, the stained clothes had been hidden, and the scene that the first responders had observed was no longer intact. Shawn's body told a story that directly contradicted the official finding of an accidental overdose. She had visible signs of fresh physical trauma, suggesting she had been in some kind of altercation shortly before her death. There was an injury to her lip significant enough to have caused bleeding, and perhaps most telling of all, forensic evidence was found under her fingernails. This type of finding is well recognized in forensic investigations as a potential indicator that someone was involved in a physical struggle before they died. The presence of that evidence made it very difficult to accept the conclusion that Shawn had simply fallen asleep after taking some substances. The physical evidence pointed to something far more troubling. The condition of Jerry Lee Lewis himself added another layer of suspicion to an already suspicious scene. First responders who saw him on the day of Shawn's death alleged that he had two bright red, deep scratches running down the back of his hand, marks that looked as if a cat had injured him from his wrist to his knuckles. The scratches were reportedly fresh, and they were consistent with the kind of injury that a person might receive if someone were trying to defend themselves. Jerry Lee offered no explanation for the scratches, and no one in his camp seemed willing to ask him about them directly. Under immense public pressure and facing outrage from Shawn's family, who believed that their daughter's death was not an accident, DeSoto County authorities presented the evidence to a Mississippi grand jury. The hearing was supposed to determine whether there was enough probable cause to charge Jerry Lee Lewis with a crime. On the day of the hearing, District Attorney Dit Ballard made the unusual decision to refuse to release the autopsy or the investigative reports to the public, citing the ongoing nature of the proceeding. The grand jurors were left to deliberate based only on the information that Ballard chose to share with them. Because only Jerry Lee and Shawn had been in the house at the time of her death, and because there were no other witnesses who could testify about what had happened, the grand jury determined that there was no probable cause to indict. Jerry Lee Lewis was officially cleared of all criminal charges. But it was later leaked to the press that the decision was not unanimous. At least 3 grand jurors disagreed with the outcome, and one of them allegedly stated that she remained convinced Jerry Lee should have gone on trial. The system had cleared him, but the questions lingered, and the man at the center of the storm would eventually break his silence about what he believed had really happened to his 5th wife. What Jerry Lee revealed about the tragedy. Throughout the entire fallout following Shawn's death, Jerry Lee Lewis consistently said he was innocent. People who believed him saw this as proof he was telling the truth. However, people who doubted him thought it meant he simply didn't care. When authorities questioned him, he did not display the nervousness or defensiveness that one might expect from a man whose wife had just died under suspicious circumstances. When the press hounded him for answers, he did not lash out or retreat. He simply repeated his position. He had done nothing wrong. Shawn's death was a tragedy, and he was as devastated as anyone by the loss. The unbothered, almost detached attitude that he displayed did not win him any sympathy from the public, but he never changed it. The first statement that Jerry Lee offered about Shawn's death came before any autopsy had been performed, before any investigation had been launched, and before the media had even fully grasped what had happened. When Acting Coroner Justice Perryman arrived at the Lewis residence to perform his initial assessment of the scene, he found Jerry Lee resting in his recliner as if nothing unusual had occurred. When Perryman asked Jerry Lee if he knew why his wife had died, the musician did not pause to think or express confusion. He simply responded with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. He said that Shawn had taken some medication. That single sentence would become the foundation of Jerry Lee's defense in the court of public opinion. Jerry Lee made it clear that Shawn had made a mistake, and that mistake had cost her her life. He claimed he was not responsible for her death because he had not administered the medication or forced her to take it. He had simply been present in the house while his wife made a terrible choice. To combat the media backlash and the blistering accusations published in Rolling Stone magazine, which had essentially accused him of getting away with a crime, Jerry Lee took an unusual step for a man in his position. He personally funded an independent private autopsy conducted by a forensic specialist of his own choosing. The decision was risky because a second autopsy could have uncovered evidence that contradicted the official ruling and made him look even more suspicious. But Jerry Lee was confident that the science would support his version of events. He used the private report to legally back up his claims of innocence and to push the narrative away from homicide toward an accident. The private autopsy, like the official one, concluded that Shawn had died from the effects of an overdose. There was no evidence of physical trauma severe enough to cause death, and no evidence that anyone else had physically contributed to her death. The report did not address the bruises on her body or the blood evidence, but it did provide a medical explanation for why she had died. And for Jerry Lee and his legal team, that was enough. When asked directly to explain what had happened to his wife, Jerry Lee firmly blamed her death on a tragic, self-inflicted accidental overdose. He claimed that Shawn had a personal problem with substance abuse, a struggle that she had kept hidden from him and from her family. He said that she had mistakenly consumed a fatal dose of his medication that was legally obtained and stored in the house for his own medical needs. He had no idea that she was taking them, he insisted, and he had no way of stopping her because he did not know she was doing it. He claimed the overdose was not his fault, but the fault of the disease of addiction that had claimed yet another victim. Jerry Lee never wavered from this story. In interviews conducted years later, when the media had moved on to other scandals and the public had mostly forgotten the details of Shawn's death, he would still answer questions about her with the same calm certainty. His fans, many of whom had stood by him through every controversy from his marriage to his cousin to his tax troubles and his health struggles, accepted his explanation. However, his critics, including members of Shawn's family, who never stopped believing that her death was not an accident, rejected it completely. The truth is that only two people knew what really happened in that house in Nesbitt, Mississippi, on the day Shawn Stevens died. One of them is dead, and the other took the secret to his grave. Jerry Lee Lewis passed away in 2022, nearly 40 years after Shawn's death, and he never once changed his story or expressed doubt about his own innocence. Whether he was a grieving husband unfairly accused or a violent man who escaped justice is a question that will never be answered definitively. What is certain is that the pattern of his marriages, the timing of his wives' deaths, and the disturbing details of the crime scene will forever haunt his legacy. Do you think Shawn's death was an accident? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.